welcome to FinextraTV's 2021 prediction series. I'm Hannah Wallace, and kindly calling into our virtual studio now is Lola Adebanji, EMEA e-commerce lead, Treasury and Trade Solutions business for Citi. So welcome, Lola. Thank you very much for calling in.
Thank you very much for having me, Hannah.
It's good to have you on. So I want to start the interview by reflecting on the year just gone. I think it's fair to say 2020 was a very turbulent year. And talk about the effect it had on commerce. Can you tell us what direction is commerce heading in for the year ahead? For example, what changes are we likely to see among consumer demands, and how might this impact traditional corporates? By no means a small question, but let's start there.
Sure, no worries. And you're absolutely right, Hannah, that 2020 has been a turbulent year in many ways, but also it has created some interesting opportunities as far as commerce is concerned. So obviously we've seen with the challenges that we've all faced that commerce has increasingly continued to converge into digital platforms. So by that I mean e-commerce as a whole, and those are digital platforms that are either servicing consumers or selling to businesses or a combination of both. So that growth in e-commerce is something that we are going to continue to see going into 2021. Even as economies open up and restrictions open up, I think there's a sense among consumers that is likely to continue quite significantly as well, even as sort of retail recovers. And I guess linked to that is, from a consumer behavior perspective, a big driver of that is obviously safety, as we all know. So consumers are really looking at the whole concept of contactless commerce. So contactless commerce being, I can purchase online, click and collect, all those sorts of different models. And with more and more consumers coming online, in fact, I think eMarketer had a statistic that last year alone, about 150 million new consumers came online to shop for the first time, right? So as we have more and more of us shopping online, the consumers are looking for that convenience, they're looking for immediacy, they're looking for simplicity, right, in that experience. And importantly as well, they're looking for safety. So all of those coming together is something that we all need to think about in terms of providing the best kind of experience to deliver this to consumers going forward into 2021. I think the second part of your question around what does this mean for traditional corporates? I think last year was about telling corporates that it's important to think about your e-commerce strategy. It's important to think about how you diversify your sales channel. I don't think any corporate needs to be told that anymore. I think pretty much all corporates now understand that that's critical to their strategy going forward. So we have seen a lot of traditional corporates really pivoting their business models in going direct to consumer. They're also going online through digital channels, where historically many of these companies may have done this through partnerships with marketplaces. They're now starting to actually create their own direct-to-consumer platforms to engage directly with the end users of their products and services, get access to richer data, and actually use that to drive conversion as well. So I think we're going to see more and more of that continue, and that is happening not only across retail brands, but across many sectors. You're seeing autos companies selling cars online as an example, and many, many more. So we will see a lot of that continue going to 2021, which creates opportunities, but at the same time, it's going to mean competition in the e-commerce world is going to increase significantly, and corporates need to work a lot harder in figuring out how do I get share of wallet and share of eyeballs from the consumer to drive sales online.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So we're certainly going to see more of an acceleration in the space. But what about B2B e-commerce then? What about that? What's the story there? And are there some challenges that we need to maybe consider, especially around SMEs? What can they expect to gain from 2021?
Absolutely. So I think what's interesting as well is the shift to e-commerce, or the growth in e-commerce that we were seeing even from last year. That's happening, as I mentioned, some of these platforms are not only servicing consumers, we've actually also seen that from a B2B perspective. So at Citi, we've been talking to a lot of our clients that have also been establishing online B2B portals as a sort of a new sales channel to engage with their small business customers. So I think we're going to see a lot more in terms of delivering these digitized purchase and payment experiences for SME customers as well through B2B e-commerce. That is going to continue to grow as well. And what's the benefit in that, right? So for companies that are going that route in servicing their customers, it's a lower cost of acquisition channel as well. In a world where you can't have your sales reps going all over the place, engaging with your customers, this gives you an avenue to keep that going in a low-cost way. And also for some companies, it becomes another avenue of attracting new SME customers in a light touch but very digital way. From a challenges perspective, I think a number of things to think about there is also how do you do this in a way that you're delivering the frictionless experience that we have in the consumer world, but also recognizing that the nature of these transactions are different, right? So you're talking probably more higher value tickets of transactions here. So having the right payment strategy, the right payment options for these customers will be important as well. For SMEs that are engaging in these new channels, I think there's a lot of benefit. It's giving them optionality in terms of payment methods, because these channels are offering more and new different payment methods. It's giving them that ease of doing business as well. So again, instead of having to interact physically, they can go into online platforms, into apps. And importantly, we're starting to see even trade finance options being embedded into these platforms that enable them to purchase now, but be able to finance that and pay later in a real-time kind of environment as well. So I think going to 2021, it will be exciting in the B2B world as well for SME businesses.
Mm-hmm. And looking ahead, that sort of leads me quite nicely into my next question, because there's a lot to be said and a lot of excitement around new alternative payment methods, both in the developed and emerging markets, aren't there? So as you're part of the Spring by Citi team, I believe, that's building out in EMEA this year, could you maybe shed some light on what's in store for us then around this area?
Sure, and maybe because Spring by Citi sounds like a very odd name, right? So maybe for your listeners who may not be familiar, what exactly is the Spring by Citi? Maybe just 30 seconds. So Spring by Citi is a new business line that we launched within the Treasury and Trade Services business at Citi. And essentially what Spring by Citi is looking to deliver is new e-commerce payment innovation for our institutional clients. So those institutional clients can be traditional corporates who are pivoting to e-commerce, existing digital companies, as well as public sector entities that are looking to engage in the digital world. What's really interesting and unique about Spring by Citi is that we're really bringing our clients the best of both worlds. So it's taking the payment services, PSP services that companies are used to around e-commerce, but also combining that with localized payment options, combining that with banking services like FX management, bringing that transparency, settlement, reconciliation, and data, and actually delivering all of this as an integrated proposition under the Citi umbrella. So enabling our clients to grow their e-commerce business successfully, but with a strong counterparty like Citi. And a big to your question, and absolutely a big part of what we've seen, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that competition is hotting up and will continue to hot up in the online world. So delivering that very hyper-local experience to your customer on the other end that makes their life easy to shop is going to be essential. And a key part of that is delivering the options of how they would want to pay that they're familiar with. So local payment methods is something that I think we're going to see grow exponentially. Beyond what we've seen, we've seen e-wallets in places like Asia. We've seen various forms of mobile wallets in Africa. But I think a very exciting aspect of this as well that we're going to see more of going to 2021 is payment options built on instant payment rails. Right, so we're seeing instant payment schemes in many markets actually being the underlying rail to enable these new e-commerce payment methods to emerge. So, you've seen in India, for example, with UPI, that's really driven online payments. If you look at markets like Sweden with Swish, a lot of these are built on instant payment rails. So I think that's an area that we're very focused on, is really how can we leverage these instant payment schemes that we are a member of in many of these markets, and use that to bring new methods of payment that will help drive e-commerce growth for our clients. So I would say watch out, instant payments, QR codes. There's going to be some exciting stuff there for e-commerce in 2021.
Fascinating. So watch this space, I think it's fair to say. So finally then, I'd love to hear your outlook on sort of what the best recipe is for a company's e-commerce growth and success for the year ahead. What advice would you give? And also like to end on talking a bit about the role of Treasury and how that might be shifting.
Sure. So best recipe, that's a very good question. That's a million dollar question, or even probably more than that for many companies. We all know e-commerce is growing. We all know it's going to be important, but how do you actually build success in this space? And I think it's a number of key things. I think first and foremost, it's going to be about who is going to win the user experience battle, right? So really providing the best possible user experience for the customer is going to be essential, but also balancing that with safety and security, because unfortunately, as commerce shifts more digital, fraud is not going away, right? There's going to be potentially more risk of fraud as well. So it's that balancing of the growth and risk. It's going to be very core to many companies. And I think aspects such as as you mentioned, the user experience, which cuts across the journey, how I'm able to check out easily. It cuts across things like the returns management. It cuts across many different areas of how you engage with the consumer. But we believe that the payment strategy is a very important lever in how you drive e-commerce success, because the payment experience you give to the customer has a direct impact on whether or not they will complete that transaction or abandon that transaction, and impacting your conversion. So when companies think about their payment strategy, they really need to think about a couple of important things. One, they need to think from a counterparty perspective. Am I working with the right partners that can not only help me in one or two markets, but can help me really scale my business in a very consistent way that de-risks the business for me as I scale into new markets? I think that's important. That hyper-local payment experience, as I mentioned, and that's not only in terms of payment methods, it's also making sure you can price in the preferred currency, local currency of the shopper, having content in local currency as well. So managing your FX risk around that is going to be very important as well. And then, as I said, making sure you can do that all very securely, right, in terms of the fraud capabilities and the data that you can draw from all of this to continue to improve your customer engagement and drive conversion. So payments, we believe, and I guess I'm a bit biased sitting in payments, but payments plays a very critical role in that success recipe, if you will. And to that point, the role of Treasury, I think what we are also saying is it's becoming increasingly important. Treasurers are starting to understand that they can play a very strategic, collaborative role with e-commerce stakeholders in their company to help drive that risk management, but also help drive growth. So a couple of areas that we've been working with treasurers to help them to help them understand this role is thinking around the risk management aspect, for example. How do you help the organization in terms of how they assess counterparty risk in new payment providers that are being selected? So Treasury getting involved in that payment provider selection process. Look at settlement risk, where the money in transit, where is it being held? How soon are you able to get access to your funds? And also, what's the downstream implications on your cash management structures? Very important for traditional companies who are now going direct to consumer. This is very new to them. And the nature of the payment flows change. So how do you think about the impact from a reconciliation, refunds, and those perspectives? Growth is also a part of what Treasury can help with. So Treasury is not only about mitigating risk, but also getting very involved in the payment strategy, using their own knowledge of the payments landscape and knowledge from their partners to help drive and provide input into the right payment strategy that will drive conversion and drive growth. So I think it's going to be very collaborative. I think the year ahead is going to require various parts of the business to come together. And that's one of the things that we're focused on from a Spring by Citi perspective, is really bringing these parts of the organizations together and delivering value to all these constituent stakeholders to drive e-commerce success for our clients.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it's fascinating. I'm so glad we got a chance to speak, because you're obviously working on some really interesting developments at Citi, and some very good advice weaved in there as well, Lola.
I hope so.
But thank you so much for calling in and sharing your predictions for the year ahead. But we'll leave it there for now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you for having me.